The bullet that shattered Beatrice Graham's life did not come from a gun, but from the words her husband spoke the day he walked out of their Philadelphia home with another woman's perfume still clinging to his coat. She stood in Abilene, Kansas now, 5 years later in the summer of 1878, watching the dust rise from the cattle pens while the evening sun painted the sky the color of old wounds, and she had built something new from the ruins he left behind. The boarding house she ran on Cedar Street stood 3 stories tall with fresh white paint and blue shutters that she had chosen herself, because they reminded her of the freedom she found after boarding that westbound train. 26 rooms housed cattlemen, drovers, railroad workers, and the occasional traveling merchant, and every dollar she earned felt like vindication. She had arrived in Abilene with $30 sewn into the hem of her dress and a determination that burned hotter than the Kansas summer sun. Now she owned property, had money in the bank, and answered to no one. Beatrice wiped her hands on her apron as she surveyed the dining room where 15 men sat eating the beef stew and cornbread she had prepared. At 29 years old, she had learned to cook for crowds, negotiate with suppliers who thought women were easy marks, and command respect in a town where respect had to be earned through grit rather than granted through courtesy. Her dark hair, which she kept pinned in a practical bun, showed no gray yet, though she sometimes felt decades older than her years. Her brown eyes, which had once been soft with trust, had hardened into something more calculating and careful. "Miss Beatrice, this is the finest meal I have eaten in 6 months of trail riding," said a young drover named Charlie, tipping his hat to her. "That will be an extra nickel for the compliment," she replied with the hint of a smile that never quite reached her eyes. The men laughed because they knew she was only half joking. She ran a fair establishment, but not a charitable one. The frontier had taught her that kindness without boundaries was just another word for weakness. Zane Thatcher noticed her first on a Tuesday afternoon when he rode into Abilene with a herd of 2,000 longhorns after 3 months on the trail from Texas. He was 28 years old, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and pale blue eyes that seemed startling against his weathered face. His dark blonde hair hung past his collar, and when he removed his hat to wipe the sweat from his forehead, dust fell like a fine powder onto his shoulders. He had been working cattle since he was 14 years old, and his hands showed the evidence of hard labor in the calluses and old rope burns that marked his palms. "I need a room for 2 weeks and a hot bath," he told the woman behind the desk in the boarding house lobby. A real bath with actual hot water, not just a bucket and a rag. Beatrice looked up from her ledger and assessed him with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every type of man the West produced. He was cleaner than most cowboys who came straight from the trail, which suggested he had some pride. His clothes were worn but mended, which meant he was either poor or practical or both. His eyes met hers directly but without the aggressive stare some men used to intimidate her. $2 a week includes breakfast and supper. Bath is 15 cents extra and I provide the soap. No spurs worn inside, no firearms in the dining room, and if you bring a woman to your room, she better be your wife or your sister. Her voice was crisp and businesslike. "I do not have a wife or a sister," Zane said, "and I am too tired to do anything but sleep for the next 12 hours. Something in his tone made her believe him. She handed him a key marked with the number 7. "Second floor, 3rd door on the right. Bath water will be ready in an hour. Supper is at 6. He paid her with coins that he counted carefully, and she noticed his hands were steady despite the obvious exhaustion in his face. Most cowboys fresh off the trail were already thinking about the saloons and gambling halls, but this one just looked grateful for a clean bed. Zane Thatcher had his own reasons for being careful. He had saved nearly $200 from the last 3 cattle drives, and he had plans to buy his own small ranch near Fort Sumner in New Mexico Territory, where the land was cheaper and the water more reliable. He was tired of working other men's cattle and sleeping on the ground with nothing but a saddle for a pillow. He wanted something permanent, something that belonged to him, something he could build into a legacy even if he had no one to leave it to yet. The bath was everything he had dreamed about for the last 1,000 miles. Beatrice had her hired man, an older fellow named Walter with a limp from an old horse accident, haul up buckets of hot water and fill the copper tub in the bathing room on the first floor. Zane scrubbed away 3 months of dirt and sweat and dust until his skin felt raw and new. He shaved carefully in front of the small mirror, washing away the thick beard that had protected his face from the sun and wind. When he looked at himself afterward, he barely recognized the man staring back. He looked younger, more vulnerable, more like the boy he had been before the West had weathered him down to something harder. At supper that evening, he sat at the long table with the other boarders and ate chicken and dumplings that tasted like something his mother might have made if she had lived long enough to teach him what a real home felt like. Beatrice moved through the dining room with efficient grace, refilling coffee cups and removing empty plates, and he found himself watching her more than he should have. There was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of burdens carried and battles fought. She was beautiful in a severe way, like a winter landscape that was striking precisely because of its harshness rather than despite it. "She does not take to flattery or flirtation," said the man sitting next to him, an older cattle buyer named Henderson. "Half the men in this town have tried, and she turns them all down flat. Word is she came here running from something back east, and she is not interested in getting tangled up with anyone again." Zane nodded but said nothing. He understood running from things. He understood the need to build walls high enough that nothing could climb over them. For the next week, he kept to himself mostly, spending his days at the stockyards helping to sort and sell the cattle he had brought north, collecting his pay from the trail boss, and adding it to his growing stake. In the evenings, he would return to the boarding house for supper and find himself drawn into conversation with Beatrice, despite her obvious reluctance to engage beyond basic pleasantries. "You are quieter than most cowboys," she observed one evening as she refilled his coffee cup. "Usually they cannot wait to tell me about every snake they saw and every river they crossed." "I figure you have heard enough cattle drive stories to last a lifetime," he replied. "I would rather hear about how you ended up running a boarding house in Abilene." Her expression cooled immediately. "That is not a story I tell. Fair enough, we all have our private territories." She looked at him sharply, as if trying to determine whether he was mocking her, but his face showed only genuine understanding. After a moment, she nodded and moved on to the next table. The breakthrough came on a Saturday afternoon when a drunk cowboy from a rival outfit started causing trouble in the lobby. He was young and loud and full of whiskey courage, and he grabbed Beatrice's wrist when she tried to escort him out. "I paid for a room, and I will go upstairs when I am good and ready. And maybe you will come with me," he slurred, pulling her closer. Zane had been coming down the stairs and covered the distance in 3 long strides. He grabbed the cowboy's shoulder and spun him around, breaking his grip on Beatrice. "The lady asked you to leave," Zane said quietly. His voice was calm, but something in his eyes made the drunk cowboy take a step back. "This is not your concern," the cowboy blustered, but his hand dropped away from his gun belt when he saw Zane's stance. "I am making it my concern. You can walk out that door on your own feet, or I can help you through it in a way you will not enjoy. Your choice." The cowboy looked between Zane and Beatrice, calculated his odds, and decided that discretion was better than a beating. He stumbled toward the door, muttering curses under his breath. After he was gone, Beatrice straightened her dress and smoothed her hair with hands that trembled slightly. "I had the situation under control. I know you did, but sometimes it is easier to let someone else handle it. I do not need rescuing, Mr. Thatcher. I know that too. Consider it just a neighbor helping another neighbor." She studied him for a long moment, her brown eyes searching his face for ulterior motives. When she found none, something in her expression softened just a fraction. "Thank you." It was the first crack in her armor, and Zane was careful not to push against it. He simply nodded and went back to his business, giving her space to rebuild her walls if she needed to. But the walls did not go back up quite as high as they had been. That evening at supper, Beatrice sat down at the table for the first time since Zane had been staying there. She had a cup of coffee in her hands, and she looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I came from Philadelphia," she said without preamble. "I was married to a man who I thought loved me. He was a banker, respectable, from a good family. For 3 years I was the perfect wife. I kept his house, hosted his dinner parties, wore the right dresses, and said the right things. And then I discovered he had been keeping a mistress in an apartment downtown for 2 of those 3 years. When I confronted him, he told me I was boring and cold, and he wanted a divorce so he could marry her instead." Zane listened without interrupting, letting her words fill the space between them. "The divorce was scandalous. His family blamed me, said I must have driven him to infidelity through some failure of my own. My own family was humiliated and told me I should have tried harder to keep him happy. So I took what little money I could claim from the settlement and bought a train ticket west. I figured if I was going to be ruined, I might as well be ruined somewhere I could start fresh." "That took courage," Zane said. "It took desperation. Courage is just another word for having no other options." "I disagree. Plenty of people have no options and still do nothing. You built something here. That is more than most people ever manage." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the vulnerability beneath the hard exterior. She was still wounded, still healing, still afraid to trust again. But she was also strong and resilient and far braver than she gave herself credit for. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "Because you deserve kindness, and because I know what it feels like to be alone." "What is your story, Mr. Thatcher?" "Zane, call me Zane. And my story is less dramatic. My parents died of fever when I was 13. No other family stepped up to take me in, so I started working cattle to survive. I have been on my own ever since. Not tragic, just lonely. That is tragic enough." They talked until the other boarders had finished their meals and wandered off to the saloons or to their rooms. They talked about the difference between loneliness and solitude, about the weight of past mistakes, about the strange beauty of the Kansas prairie when the wheat turned gold in the summer heat. Zane told her about his plans to buy land in New Mexico, and she told him about her dream of eventually owning a hotel instead of just a boarding house, something grand with a chandelier in the lobby and real carpets on the floors. "You will do it," Zane said with certainty. "I can tell you are the type of person who gets what she sets her mind to." "How can you tell?" "Because you are still here. Because you did not let your past destroy you. Because you fight every day even when it would be easier to quit." Something shifted between them that night, a connection forming like the first threads of a spider's web, delicate but surprisingly strong. Beatrice found herself looking for Zane during the day, listening for his footsteps on the stairs, saving the best pieces of pie for his dessert. Zane started finding excuses to be at the boarding house more often. helping Walter repair a loose board on the porch, carrying heavy supply crates from the freight office, sitting in the lobby in the evening reading a newspaper just to be near her. The other boarders noticed and teased them both gently, but neither Beatrice nor Zane acknowledged what was happening between them. They were both too cautious, too scarred by past disappointments to rush into anything that might hurt them again. 3 weeks after Zane first arrived in Abilene, he told Beatrice he would be leaving in 2 days to head south to New Mexico. "I found a piece of land being sold by a widow whose husband died last winter. 300 acres with a creek running through it and a small cabin. The price is fair, and if I do not take it now, someone else will." Beatrice felt something sink in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "That sounds like a good opportunity. Come with me." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. "What?" She stared at him. "Come with me. Marry me. We can build something together in New Mexico. You said you wanted something bigger than a boarding house. We can start a ranch, run cattle, maybe eventually build a hotel in Fort Sumner when the railroad comes through. We work well together. We understand each other, and I think we could be happy if we tried. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are strong and smart and brave. I know you make me laugh. I know I look forward to seeing you every day. I know I do not want to go to New Mexico without you. This is insane. People do not get married after knowing each other for 3 weeks. People on the frontier do it all the time. Besides, you married a man you knew much longer, and that did not work out. Maybe knowing someone for years is not as important as understanding them in the ways that matter." Beatrice wanted to say yes with a ferocity that frightened her. But fear held her back. The fear of being hurt again. The fear of giving up the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. The fear of discovering that this good man was just another illusion waiting to shatter. "I need time to think," she said. "Take all the time you need. But I am leaving in 2 days with or without an answer." He left her alone then, and she spent the next day and night wrestling with herself. Part of her wanted to play it safe, to stay in Abilene where she knew the routines and the risks. But another part of her, the part that had been brave enough to board that westbound train 5 years ago, wanted to take the chance. She had been existing rather than living, keeping herself so carefully guarded that she had forgotten what it felt like to be open to possibility. Walter found her sitting on the back porch the next morning, watching the sun rise over the cattle pens. "You are thinking about going with him," Walter said. It was not a question. "Am I that obvious? Only to someone who has been watching you pretend not to be lonely for the last 3 years. He is a good man, Miss Beatrice. I have seen a lot of men come through here and that one has character. He does not drink to excess, he treats people with respect, and he looks at you like you hung the moon. What if I am making a mistake? What if you are making the right choice and you let fear talk you out of it? That seems like a worse mistake to me." She made her decision then, and it felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She found Zane at the stockyards, settling his final accounts with the cattle buyers. He saw her approaching and straightened up, hope and anxiety warring in his expression. "Yes," she said simply. His face broke into a smile that transformed him from merely handsome to breathtaking. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will come to New Mexico. Yes, I am probably crazy, but I am tired of letting fear make my decisions." He picked her up and spun her around right there in the dusty street, not caring who saw them. When he set her down, he kissed her for the first time, gentle and reverent, and she felt something in her chest crack open like a seed splitting to let new growth emerge. They were married the next day by a circuit judge who happened to be in town. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress she had been saving for a special occasion, and Zane bought her a gold wedding band from the jeweler on Main Street. Walter and a few of the regular boarders served as witnesses. It was nothing like Beatrice's first wedding, which had been an elaborate affair with 200 guests and 6 courses and a dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. This was better. This was real. Beatrice sold the boarding house to a couple from Iowa who had been looking to settle in Abilene. She got a good price for it, and combined with Zane's savings, they had enough money to not only buy the New Mexico land, but also stock it with cattle and supplies. She packed her belongings, said goodbye to the town where she had rebuilt herself, and climbed onto the wagon seat next to her new husband with a sense of rightness she had never expected to feel again. The journey to Fort Sumner took 3 weeks. They traveled with a small wagon train for safety, sharing campsites with other families heading south and west. The days were long and hot, and the nights were cool enough to require blankets. Zane taught Beatrice how to handle the reins of the wagon team, and she taught him how to make decent biscuits over a campfire. They talked constantly, learning each other's histories and preferences and dreams. She told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about the strict expectations her family had placed on her, about how she had always felt like she was performing rather than living. He told her about growing up on various ranches, about learning to rope and ride and survive, about the loneliness of never having a place to call home. "I want to build something permanent," Zane said one night as they lay under the stars. "I want to put down roots so deep nothing can tear them up. I want to know that when I wake up in the morning, I will be in the same place I went to sleep, with the same person beside me, working toward the same future." "I want that too," Beatrice said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. They arrived in Fort Sumner in late August of 1878 when the heat was oppressive, and the land looked harsh and unforgiving. The town was small but growing, built around the old Army fort that had been abandoned after the end of the Navajo and Apache conflicts. The Pecos River ran nearby, providing water for the scattered ranches and farms. The widow's land was 10 miles outside of town, accessible by a rough track that barely qualified as a road. The cabin was smaller than Beatrice had imagined. Just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and a roof that needed repair. But the land itself was beautiful in a stark way, with rolling hills covered in pale grass and stands of cottonwood trees along the creek. Zane walked the property boundaries with her, pointing out where he wanted to build corrals and a barn, where the best grazing would be, where they might eventually build a larger house. "It will take years of work," he warned her. "It will be hard and sometimes frustrating. There will be droughts and harsh winters and cattle that die despite our best efforts. Are you sure you want this life?" "I am sure I want this life with you," she replied. "The rest we will figure out as we go." They threw themselves into the work with the energy of people who had finally found their purpose. Zane spent his days building fences and corrals, riding into town to negotiate the purchase of cattle from other ranchers, learning the patterns of the land and water. Beatrice worked on making the cabin livable, patching the roof, sewing curtains, planting a garden that she coaxed into reluctant growth with careful watering. She also started baking bread and pies to sell in Fort Sumner, using the skills she had developed at the boarding house to bring in extra money. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was also satisfying in a way her life had never been before. Every improvement they made to the property was visible and lasting. Every fence post Zane sank into the ground was a statement of permanence. Every row of vegetables Beatrice planted was a declaration of hope for the future. Their marriage deepened during those first months on the ranch. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, figured out how to work together without stepping on each other's toes, discovered that they were stronger as a partnership than they had ever been individually. Zane was patient and steady, never raising his voice even when things went wrong, always willing to listen to Beatrice's ideas and suggestions. Beatrice was organized and determined, pushing them both to keep going when the work seemed overwhelming, finding creative solutions to problems that seemed insurmountable. At night, they would collapse into bed exhausted but content, and Beatrice would lie awake sometimes just listening to Zane breathe beside her, marveling at the fact that she had found this unexpected happiness. The intimacy between them grew naturally, without the awkwardness or shame that had characterized her first marriage. Zane treated her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished rather than used, and she responded with a passion she had not known she was capable of. By October, they had 20 head of cattle grazing on their land, a functional barn, and a chicken coop that provided fresh eggs. The garden had yielded enough vegetables to can for the winter, and Beatrice's baking business was bringing in a steady trickle of income. They were not wealthy, not even close to comfortable, but they were building something real. And then Thomas Graham came to Fort Sumner looking for his former wife. Beatrice was in town delivering pies to the general store when she heard a familiar voice asking the shopkeeper if he knew of a woman named Beatrice who had come from Abilene. Every muscle in her body went rigid. She set down her basket and turned slowly to see her former husband standing in the doorway, looking older and more worn than she remembered, but still unmistakably Thomas. He saw her at the same moment, and his face showed a complex mixture of relief and determination, and something that might have been regret. "Beatrice," he said, "I have been looking for you for 3 months." She found her voice, though it came out harder and colder than she intended. "What are you doing here, Thomas? I came to bring you home. I made a mistake, Beatrice. A terrible mistake. Margaret left me 6 months after we married. Turns out she was not interested in being a banker's wife, just in spending a banker's money. I lost my position at the bank because of the scandal. I lost my standing in society. I lost everything that mattered, but I realized that the biggest thing I lost was you. You did not lose me. You threw me away. I know, and I am here to make it right. Come back to Philadelphia with me. We can start over. Your family would forgive you if you came back with me. We could rebuild our life together." Beatrice felt a hysterical laugh building in her throat. "Rebuild our life? Thomas, we do not have a life together anymore. We have not had one for 5 years. I divorced you. I moved on. I know about the divorce, but it was not your fault. I was the one who strayed. I am willing to marry you again, to do it properly this time, to be faithful, to make you happy. I do not want to be married to you again. I am already married to someone else, to someone who actually loves me." Thomas's face went pale, then red with anger. "Married? To whom? Some rough frontier cowboy? Beatrice, be reasonable. You cannot possibly prefer this primitive life to what we had in Philadelphia. What we had in Philadelphia was a lie. What I have here is real. Where is he? This husband of yours. I want to meet the man who stole my wife. I was not your wife when he married me, and you cannot steal something that was given freely." But Thomas was already pushing past her, asking the shopkeeper where the Graham ranch was located. The shopkeeper, sensing trouble, kept his mouth shut, but someone else in the store less wisely provided directions. Thomas stormed out, and Beatrice felt ice flooding her veins. She grabbed her empty basket and ran for her horse, riding hard for the ranch with fear driving her faster than she had ever ridden before. She arrived to find Thomas's hired buggy already in the yard, and Thomas himself standing at the door of the cabin, arguing with Zane. Her husband stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, his body language making it clear that Thomas was not going to get past him. "I am telling you, that woman is my wife, and I have every right to speak with her," Thomas was saying, his voice rising with entitled anger. "No, that woman is my wife, and she does not want to speak with you." Zane's voice was calm but unyielding. "She's done with you, has been for 5 years. Time you accepted that and moved on." "This is ridiculous. Beatrice," Thomas shouted past Zane. "Beatrice, come out here and tell this man who you really belong to." Beatrice dismounted and walked toward them on legs that felt unsteady. Both men turned to look at her, and the contrast between them was striking. Thomas in his city clothes, soft from years of desk work, his face flushed with indignation, and the assumption that he could control the situation through sheer force of will. Zane in his work clothes, sun-hardened and strong, his face calm despite the tension in his shoulders, trusting her to make her own choice. "Thomas, you need to leave," Beatrice said as firmly as she could manage. "Not until we have talked. Not until I have had a chance to explain." "There is nothing to explain. We had a marriage. You destroyed it. I built a new life. That is the entire story. You cannot be happy here. Look at this place, Beatrice. It is barely more than a shack. You are cooking and cleaning and living like a common laborer. I can give you so much more. You never gave me anything but pain and humiliation. Zane gives me respect and partnership and love. I would rather live in a shack with him than in a mansion with you." Thomas looked between them, and something ugly twisted his features. "I see. You have become one of those women. Cheap and easy, willing to spread your legs for any man who shows you attention. I should have known. You were always cold in our marriage bed. I had to find warmth elsewhere." Zane moved so fast that Beatrice barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, the next he had Thomas by his expensive coat, lifting him slightly off the ground. "You will not speak to her that way," Zane said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will not stand on my property and insult my wife. You will get in your buggy and drive back to town and take the next train east, or I will give you a reason to leave that you will not enjoy. You are threatening me. I am promising you. The only reason I am not hitting you right now is because Beatrice would not want me to. But if you say one more word to or about her, I will forget about what she wants and do what you deserve." Thomas struggled against Zane's grip, but could not break free. When Zane finally released him, he stumbled backward, his face a mixture of shock and outrage and, underneath it all, fear. "This is not over," Thomas said, trying to regain some dignity. "I will go to the authorities. I will tell them you threatened me. Go ahead. The sheriff knows us. He knows we are decent people trying to make an honest living. He does not know you at all. Who do you think he will believe?" Thomas looked at Beatrice one last time. "You will regret this. When this cowboy gets tired of you, when you are old and worn out from this hard life, you will regret not coming back to civilization with me." "The only thing I regret is wasting 3 years of my life with you," Beatrice said. "Now get off our land." They watched him drive away, the buggy wheels kicking up dust on the rough track. Beatrice was shaking, adrenaline and old fears coursing through her system. When Thomas was finally out of sight, Zane turned to her and pulled her into his arms. "Are you all right?" He asked gently. "I think so. I never thought I would see him again. I thought that part of my life was completely behind me." "It is behind you. He has no power over you anymore. He's done. You made that clear. Did you mean it? What you said about me being your wife and being done with him. Every word. You are mine now and I am yours, and nothing he says or does can change that unless you want it to change." She pulled back to look at him, seeing the absolute certainty in his eyes. "I do not want it to change. This is my life now. You are my life now. I just needed to say it out loud to him to make it real. It was real before you said it, but I am glad you did. He needed to hear it. They went inside the cabin and Beatrice collapsed into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Zane made coffee and sat across from her, waiting patiently for her to process what had happened. He looked so much older, she said finally, and smaller somehow. When I was married to him, he seemed so important and powerful, but standing next to you, he just looked like a sad, bitter man. People show their true size when they are not getting what they want. He said I would regret choosing this life, choosing you. Will you? No, never. Even if things get hard, even if we struggle, even if we fail at every single thing we are trying to build here, I will not regret choosing you, because you chose me back. You see me, Zane. The real me, not some image you want me to fit into. That is worth more than all the comfort and society Philadelphia could offer. He reached across the table and took her hand. I see you, and I love what I see, all of it, the strong parts and the scared parts and everything in between. I love you too, she said, and it was the first time either of them had spoken those words aloud. They hung in the air between them, bright and true and transformative. The crisis with Thomas should have been the end of their troubles, but life on the frontier was never that simple. A week later, a late-season storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing rain that lasted for 3 days and turned the creek into a raging torrent. Zane went out to check on the cattle and returned soaked to the skin, reporting that 2 steers had gotten swept downstream and would probably be lost. We need better fencing along the creek, he said, stripping off his wet clothes and shivering despite the fire Beatrice had built up in the fireplace. I will work on it when the water goes down. But before the water went down, Zane fell ill. At first, it seemed like just a cold from being out in the rain, but within 2 days he was burning with fever and coughing so hard his whole body shook. Beatrice recognized the symptoms with a terror that made her hands go numb. Pneumonia. In a time and place where modern medicine was scarce and doctors were few, pneumonia was often a death sentence. She rode into Fort Sumner through mud and rain to fetch the town's doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Patterson, who had seen more death than life in his long career. He examined Zane and confirmed Beatrice's fears. Keep him warm and hydrated. Force him to drink water and broth even if he does not want it. Keep the fever down with cool cloths. And pray. That is about all we can do. Either his body will fight it off or it will not. Beatrice spent the next week barely sleeping, sitting beside Zane's bed and tending to him with a desperation that bordered on obsession. She changed the cool cloths on his forehead every hour, spooned water and broth into his mouth when he was lucid enough to swallow, held him when the fever dreams made him thrash and cry out. She prayed, even though she had not prayed in years, bargaining with a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. You cannot leave me, she whispered to him during the worst of it, when his fever spiked so high she feared his brain would cook. We just found each other. We just started building our life. You promised me permanent. You promised me roots so deep nothing could tear them up. You cannot break that promise now. On the 8th day, his fever broke. She woke from an exhausted doze to find him looking at her with clear eyes, weak but conscious. Hey, he rasped. Hey, yourself. She pressed her hand to his forehead and nearly sobbed with relief at the normal temperature. You scared me. Sorry, how long? 8 days. You have been very sick. 8 days. The cattle, the ranch, is fine. I have been handling it. Walter came out from town to help with the heavy work. Everything is fine. You just need to rest and get your strength back. You look exhausted. I will sleep when I am sure you are going to live. He managed a weak smile. I am going to live. I am too stubborn to die now that I finally have something worth living for. It took Zane 3 weeks to fully recover his strength, and Beatrice would not let him do any heavy work for another 2 weeks after that. She was fiercely protective, practically standing guard over him, making sure he ate enough and rested enough, and did not push himself too hard. Zane tolerated her hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from love rather than a lack of faith in his judgment. Walter had stayed at the ranch during the worst of Zane's illness, and the older man's help had been invaluable. He had fed the livestock, repaired storm damage, and even started on the new fencing along the creek. When Zane was finally back on his feet, he tried to pay Walter for his labor, but the older man refused. "You gave me work and dignity in Abilene when most folks just saw a crippled old cowboy who was past his usefulness," Walter said. "And Miss Beatrice treated me like family. This is what family does for each other." "Then stay," Beatrice said impulsively. "Stay here and work the ranch with us. We could use the help and you could use a permanent home. We have enough land and cattle to support 3 people if we are careful." Walter looked between them, his weathered face showing emotion that he quickly tried to hide. "You mean that?" "Every word," Zane confirmed. "We will build you your own cabin come spring. Until then you can stay in the barn. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry." "I do not need fancy. I need to be needed, and I would be honored to call this place home." So Walter became part of their family, an unexpected addition but a welcome one. He brought decades of ranching experience that proved invaluable as they worked to build the herd and improve the property. He also brought companionship and humor during the long winter months when the isolation could become oppressive. The 3 of them developed an easy rhythm, working together during the day and sharing meals in the evening, swapping stories, and making plans for the future. The winter of 1878 to 1879 was harsh, with snowstorms that buried the landscape and temperatures that made it dangerous to be outside for more than a few minutes at a time. They lost 3 cattle to the cold despite their best efforts, but they saved the rest through constant vigilance and hard work. Beatrice learned to appreciate the simple pleasures of those months, the warmth of the fire, the companionship of people who cared about her, the security of knowing that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Zane had recovered completely from his illness, but the experience had changed something in both of them. They were more aware of how fragile life could be, more determined to make the most of the time they had together, more willing to express the love they felt rather than keeping it locked inside. They talked about the future with a new urgency, making plans not just for the ranch but for the family they wanted to build. "I want children," Beatrice told him one night as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside. "I did not think I did after my first marriage fell apart. I thought I would never trust anyone enough to build that kind of future, but I want children with you." "How many?" Zane asked, his hand resting on her stomach as if he could conjure a baby into existence through sheer will. "As many as God sees fit to bless us with. 2, 3, 6. I do not care. I just want a house full of life and noise and chaos. I want to build the family neither of us had growing up. We will need a bigger house. Then we will build a bigger house. We will build whatever we need to build to make our dreams real." Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it came new challenges and new opportunities. They bought more cattle with money Beatrice earned from her baking, and money Zane earned from taking occasional work with other ranchers. They planted a larger garden and added a dozen chickens to their flock. They broke ground on a new house, a real house with 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. And they received word that the railroad was planning to extend its line to Fort Sumner within the next 2 years, which would make shipping cattle to market exponentially easier and more profitable. Everything they had been working toward was starting to come together in a way that felt almost magical in its synchronicity. In June of 1879, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before she told Zane. When Dr. Patterson confirmed it, she rode home with a joy so profound it felt like she might burst from the sheer pressure of it. She found Zane working on the frame of the new house with Walter, both men shirtless in the summer heat, their backs bronzed from the sun. She watched them for a moment, appreciating the life they were building board by board, nail by nail. Then she called Zane over. "I have news," she said. He looked at her face and immediately smiled. "Good news, the best. We are going to have a baby." He picked her up and spun her around just like he had that day in Abilene when she agreed to marry him, his joy as unrestrained as her own. Walter whooped from the house frame and threw his hammer in the air in celebration. "When?" Zane asked, setting her down gently as if she might break. "January or February, the doctor thinks. Our baby will be born in 1880. A new decade, a new generation, a new beginning. We need to finish the house before then. We need a proper nursery and a kitchen big enough for a family and enough space for all of us. We have 7 months, we can do it." And they did. Working with focused determination, the three of them completed the house by November, and it was everything Beatrice had dreamed of and more. The walls were sturdy, the roof was tight, and the rooms were bright with windows that let in the New Mexico sunshine. They moved their few possessions from the old cabin and set up their new home with a sense of accomplishment that felt earned through sweat and sacrifice. Walter moved into the old cabin, which they had renovated and expanded to give him a comfortable place of his own. He declared it the finest home he had ever lived in, and Beatrice suspected he was not exaggerating. The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice was sick for the first 4 months, exhausted for the next 2, and uncomfortable for the final trimester. But she was also happier than she had ever been, watching her body change to accommodate the new life growing inside her, feeling the baby move and kick, imagining the child she would soon meet. Zane was attentive to the point of being overprotective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a plate, constantly worrying about her health and the baby's health. "You are going to drive me crazy if you keep hovering," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from sweeping the porch. "I nearly lost you once already. I am not taking any chances. You nearly lost me to my former husband, not to pregnancy. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am going to be fine. I know, but let me worry anyway. It makes me feel useful." She kissed him then, standing on her tiptoes to reach his lips despite her swollen belly. "You are useful. You built me a house. You gave me a life I never thought I would have. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. That is more useful than you can possibly imagine." Their son was born on January 23, 1880, after 12 hours of labor that tested Beatrice's strength and courage in ways she had never been tested before. Dr. Patterson attended the birth with assistance from a midwife from town, and Zane paced the front room wearing a path in the new floorboards while Walter tried unsuccessfully to distract him. When the baby's first cry split the air, Zane nearly broke down the bedroom door in his haste to get inside. He found Beatrice exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny red-faced bundle against her chest. "We have a son," she said, tears streaming down her face. "A beautiful, perfect son." Zane knelt beside the bed and looked at his child with wonder. The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were still unfocused, but would probably turn blue like his father's. His tiny fingers gripped Zane's offered thumb with surprising strength, and Zane felt his heart expand to accommodate a love he had not known was possible. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at the baby's face, Zane knew exactly what he wanted to call his son. Jacob Graham Thatcher. A name that honors your family name but also makes him ours. Jacob, Beatrice repeated, testing the sound of it. I love it. Hello, Jacob. Welcome to the world, little one. We have been waiting so long to meet you. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and the particular chaos that comes with a newborn. But they were also filled with moments of transcendent joy, watching Jacob grow and change, seeing his first smile, hearing his first laugh, witnessing his personality begin to emerge. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss, and both Beatrice and Zane were completely besotted with him. Walter appointed himself honorary grandfather and could often be found carving toys for Jacob or rocking him to sleep while humming old trail songs. The ranch continued to grow and prosper despite the demands of parenthood. They hired 2 additional hands to help with the cattle, young men from town who were eager to learn ranching and willing to work hard. The herd expanded to nearly 200 head, and when the railroad finally came through in 1881, they were able to ship their cattle to market and make a profit that would have seemed impossible 3 years earlier. Beatrice started her hotel project in Fort Sumner in the spring of 1882, using the ranch profits and her own savings to purchase a lot on Main Street and begin construction. It was a smaller version of what she had originally envisioned, but it was still impressive by frontier standards. A 2-story building with 20 rooms, a dining room, and a lobby with a small but genuine chandelier. She hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations so she could focus on the ranch and her family, but she visited several times a week to oversee the business and make decisions about improvements and expansions. You did it, Zane told her the day the hotel opened. You built your dream. We did it, she corrected. None of this would have been possible without you, without us. In the summer of 1883, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous and more excited, knowing what to expect and confident in her ability to handle the challenges. Their daughter was born in March of 1884, a small but fierce baby with Beatrice's dark hair and Zane's blue eyes. They named her Rose, and she was everything Jacob was not, fussy and demanding and strong-willed from the moment she entered the world. She's going to keep us on our toes, Doctor, Patterson said with a chuckle as he examined the baby. Good, Beatrice replied. I want her to be strong. I want her to grow up knowing she can be anything and do anything she sets her mind to. I want her to never have to depend on a man for her worth or her security. With you as her mother, I have no doubt she will turn out exactly like that, Zane said. The ranch was now firmly established, successful enough to support their growing family and provide employment for several local men. The hotel was profitable and gaining a reputation as the finest accommodation between Santa Fe and Texas. Beatrice and Zane had achieved what they set out to build, a permanent home, a thriving business, a family full of love and laughter. But the greatest achievement was not the property or the money or the social standing they had earned. It was the relationship they had built with each other, a partnership founded on respect and trust and genuine affection. They still talked for hours every night after the children were asleep, sharing thoughts and dreams and fears, just like they had those first weeks in Abilene. They still looked for each other throughout the day, exchanging glances and smiles that communicated more than words ever could. They still made each other laugh, still surprised each other, still chose each other every single day. On their 5th wedding anniversary in August of 1884, Zane took Beatrice up to a hill overlooking the ranch where they could see everything they had built spread out below them. The new house with smoke rising from the chimney, the barn and corrals full of healthy livestock, the fields green with crops, the old cabin where Walter lived. In the distance, they could see the beginnings of Fort Sumner growing larger as more people moved to the area. When I think about where we started and where we are now, it seems impossible, Beatrice said, leaning back against Zane's chest as his arms wrapped around her. 5 years ago, I was alone and afraid and convinced I would never trust anyone again. And now I have this. I have you and Jacob and Rose and a life I love. How did we get so lucky? It was not luck. It was courage. You were brave enough to take a chance on me, and I was smart enough to know what I had found when I found you. We built this together, and we will keep building it together for the rest of our lives. Promise me something, she said, turning to look at him. Anything? Promise me you will never stop seeing me. Not really seeing me, not just as a wife or a mother or a business partner, but as me. Beatrice, the woman who left Philadelphia with nothing but hope and determination, the woman who took a chance on a cowboy she barely knew, the woman who would rather live in a shack with you than a mansion with anyone else. I promise. I will always see you, Beatrice, all of you. Even when you are old and gray and so stubborn I want to tear my hair out, I will still see you exactly as you are, and I will still love you exactly as you are. She kissed him then, long and deep, and when they finally pulled apart, she was smiling through tears. Let us go home, she said. I want to check on the children and make sure Walter has not taught Jacob any more bad words, and start thinking about what to make for supper. I want to go home and live our beautifully ordinary life. They walked down the hill together hand in hand, heading back to the house full of noise and love and chaos. And Beatrice thought about how this was the life she had dreamed of when she boarded that westbound train. Not a life without problems or challenges, but a life that was hers, lived on her own terms with a partner who valued her for exactly who she was. The years continued to unfold with all the expected joys and hardships that come with ranching and raising children. Jacob grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved working with the cattle and following his father around the ranch. Rose was as fierce and independent as Beatrice had hoped, constantly getting into mischief and questioning everything. In 1886, they welcomed a third child, another son they named William, who was born with a sunny disposition that made everyone smile. Walter passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1887, and they buried him on the hill overlooking the ranch with a simple marker that read, Walter Hayes, friend and family. His death was the first real loss their little family had experienced, and it hit them all hard. But it also reminded them of how precious time was and how important it was to appreciate the people they loved while they still had them. The ranch continued to prosper as the years passed. They added more land, more cattle, more improvements. The hotel in Fort Sumner was so successful that Beatrice opened a second one in a nearby town. They built a school on their property so Jacob, Rose, and William could receive an education without having to travel to town every day. They hired a teacher from back east, a young woman named Sarah who was grateful for the opportunity to teach in the West, and who eventually married one of their ranch hands. Life was not perfect. There were years when drought threatened their livelihood, years when cattle prices dropped, and they had to tighten their belts. There were illnesses and injuries, and the constant worry that comes with raising children in a sometimes dangerous environment. But there was also laughter and love, and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful from nothing. Beatrice never heard from Thomas again. After that day, he showed up at the ranch. She learned through a letter from an old acquaintance in Philadelphia that he had remarried, this time to a woman from a wealthy family who kept him on a tight leash. She felt nothing when she read about him. No anger or bitterness or even curiosity. That part of her life was so completely finished that it felt like it had happened to someone else. In the spring of 1890, on a warm afternoon when the wildflowers covered the hills in blankets of color, Beatrice stood on the porch of their home watching her children play in the yard. Jacob was teaching Rose how to rope a fence post while William toddled around getting in everyone's way. Zane was working with several ranch hands to repair a section of fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sweat staining his back. She felt a wave of contentment so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. This was everything she had wanted and more than she had dared to hope for. A home that was truly hers, children who were loved and safe, a husband who was still her best friend and greatest supporter, a business that provided security and independence, a place in the community that was earned through hard work and integrity. Zane looked up from his work and saw her standing there. Even from a distance, even after 7 years of marriage, his face still lit up when he saw her. He handed his tools to one of the hands and walked toward the house, pulling off his gloves as he came. "What are you thinking about?" he asked when he reached her, leaning against the porch railing. "I am thinking about how far we have come. I am thinking about that first day in Abilene when you asked me to come to New Mexico with you. I am thinking about how terrified I was and how brave I pretended to be. I am thinking about how every choice I have made since then has led me here to this moment, with you and our children and this life we have built. Any regrets? Not a single one. You have regrets, only that I did not find you sooner. Think of all the time we could have had together if we had met when we were younger. We were not ready for each other when we were younger. We had to become the people we needed to be before we could find each other. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to happen." He reached out and pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You are probably right. You are usually right about these things." "I know," she said with a laugh. "It is one of my most endearing qualities." The children ran up to the porch then, demanding attention and snacks and resolutions to whatever minor disputes they had been having. Beatrice and Zane separated to tend to their offspring, falling into the familiar rhythms of parenthood that had become second nature. But as she cut slices of pie and poured glasses of milk and mediated arguments about whose turn it was to feed the chickens, Beatrice caught Zane's eye across the kitchen, and they shared a smile that said everything that needed to be said. As the sun set that evening, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the Thatcher family gathered on the porch for supper. They held hands and said grace, thanking God for the food and the land and each other. Then they ate and talked and laughed as the stars began to appear overhead, each one a small light in the darkness, each one a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the frontier, they had found exactly where they belonged. Beatrice looked around the table at the faces she loved most in the world and thought about the girl she had been in Philadelphia, trapped in a life that was slowly suffocating her, convinced she would never be anything more than someone's disappointing wife. That girl would not recognize the woman she had become, strong and capable and free in ways she had never imagined possible. And it had all started with a cowboy in Abilene who had seen past her defenses to the person underneath, who had offered her a chance at something real, who had stood at the door and told her former husband that she was done. Done with the past, done with being defined by other people's expectations, done with settling for less than she deserved. She was done with all of that. And what she had found instead was everything she had never known to hope for. A love that was genuine and lasting, a partnership that made her stronger rather than smaller, a life that was hers to shape and build and live on her own terms. The children eventually wandered off to bed, tired from a long day of play and work and learning. Zane and Beatrice stayed on the porch a while longer, sitting together on the swing he had built, rocking gently as the night sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Owls hooted in the cottonwoods along the creek. Cattle lowed softly in the distance. A coyote sang somewhere on the hills. "I love you," Beatrice said quietly. "I love you too," Zane replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something permanent from the ashes of their broken pasts. They had decades still ahead of them, years of watching their children grow and have children of their own, years of continuing to build and improve and prosper, years of falling more deeply in love with each passing season. But in that moment, on that particular evening in the spring of 1890, with the stars overhead and the land they loved stretched out before them, they had everything they needed. They had each other, they had their family, they had their home. They had taken their chances and made their choices, and reaped the rewards of courage and faith, an unwavering commitment to building a life worth living. And when Beatrice finally went to sleep that night, curled against Zane's warm body in the bed they had shared for 7 years, she did not dream of Philadelphia or her old life, or the pain that Thomas had caused her. She dreamed of the future, of grandchildren playing in the yard of this house, of the ranch continuing to thrive long after she was gone, of love that would echo through generations as a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other completely and without reservation. She was done with the past. She was living fully in the present, and the future stretched before her bright and beautiful and full of infinite possibility. This was her happily ever after, hard-won and deeply appreciated, and she would cherish every single moment of it for the rest of her days.